Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and we'd like to thank XIT 104. That's Exit 104, very much sponsoring this episode. Exit 104 do a huge range of accessories for housings and cameras. Please visit them at Exit 404, exit404.com. I'm very happy to be joined today by John Betts. Hi, John.
Hey, Adam, pleasure.
Where are you, John? I was going to say John from, and then I thought I'm not sure where you are at the moment.
I am based in Portland, Maine.
Okay, there we are. So it's in the morning for you. It's mid-afternoon for me here. Um, um, John's a filmmaker, and both topside and underwater. But obviously, for the purpose today, you're an underwater. You're an underwater filmmaker, John. Sorry. And I thought it'd be a great thing to ask what he's been up to recently. See what he's been shooting.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I film mostly conservation projects. So I do a lot of work on the ocean. I do mostly science and wildlife and conservation work. I mostly work with Pristine Seas, which is a National Geographic initiative. We go out and explore and protect the last wild places in the oceans. I also make TV shows, and so I do sort of expeditions, longer month-long marine science conservation expeditions, and then I do a couple of weeks here and there, video shoots for TV shows mostly. So I was in Galapagos earlier this year, Cocos. I just came back from the Southern Line Islands.
Wow.
So I'm doing a fair amount.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those of us that have been very restricted travel, we're all saying stuff like that doesn't make you any friends.
Yeah, sorry. It's been nice to get back out again for sure.
Yeah, no, fortunately it's getting better, isn't it? So yeah,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
um, one of the things that I thought, obviously, wealth of information, we're going to pick your brains about all sorts of stuff, but one of the things I thought would be interesting, I know I'm Ryan from Reef Photo and from Nauticam USA has told me that you've been shooting with the new Red camera, and I'm very aware that this Wetpixel Live's been very photocentric, but obviously this is a big deal, and it's something we need to talk about. So I was hoping possibly you could give us I was going to say 20 seconds, but that would be completely unfair. A quick rundown about Red and maybe leading up to obviously the new model, which is the latest and greatest. So
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been using Red cameras topside for years, for over a decade, and more recently underwater. I mean, the big thing obviously with Red is RAW, R3D RAW. It's huge.
yep,
Being able to have that flexibility in post is incredibly useful, especially for underwater. So, I mean, I've been using just recently, like you just described, the new Red, this Raptor, which is, I mean, it is, I have to say, it's really above and beyond anything that I've used before, especially for underwater work. I mean, it's hard to really, the big takeaways are the resolution. It's obviously 8K,
yep.
RAW, large sensor size, the VistaVision sensor. All these things together really make it a unique camera for underwater. You can adjust everything in post. You have the full flexibility and of white balance and everything else, and then also having the high resolution and the low light capabilities and the high frame rates and all of that. It really just opens up a lot of possibilities. So far, it's been fantastic.
So VistaVision, what size is that? What actual dimensions is that, John?
Yeah. So 41 millimeters by 21 millimeters
Okay,
approximately. So it's
okay.
full. 36 by 24 is a full frame still image. So it's a little bit of a different dimension, but it's basically the same as a full frame still image.
So
And it's a nice. Yeah. Go ahead.
would you then crop that into a 16:9 aspect ratio, or does the camera do that, or do you do that in post? You capture in that and then crop it in post, or
Either way, so the native sensor aspect is 17 by 9, so you can shoot in the full aspect and then crop it later, or you can choose in camera to shoot 16 by 9 or 2:1 or anything you want. So you can choose that, or even anamorphic. So anything you want, you can just select that in camera, or you could crop it in post. It's also nice to be able. I mean, the 8K is great, right? 8K, high resolution, small pixels, low noise. It's really great, a nice perspective. But you don't always want that, right? Because you use crop lenses. I mean, it sort of limits your lens choice a little bit.
sure.
So it's really nice to be able to also crop in camera, so you can have this almost a dual format type of feel where you can shoot in 8K in the full sensor size, or you can shoot in 6K, which is more of a Super 35 or APS-C size crop, and then you can
Yep.
use all of your APS-C lenses. So that's a nice combo to be able to, and then you still have 6K resolution, so it's still
Yeah. And so when your clients come to you, are they asking for 8K, asking for 6K? I mean, I know for a while they've been asking for 4K, from my understanding. Are they now saying, right, we want 6K, we want 8K, or are they saying no, we still want 4K? What are you selling it to people? Are you selling?
Yeah, in my work, I mean, it's all about 4K. So I think that anyone would pretty much accept 4K. That's really all that's needed. In the work that I'm doing, it's always just the highest quality that we can deliver. So we always
Okay.
deliver the raw files in full resolution, and that just allows more flexibility in post.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, yeah, because yeah. I mean, of course, that's a fundamental difference in that still photographers tend to deliver a processed image, whereas videographers, filmmakers will produce the raw footage, and someone else will then stitch it together. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And
Yep.
that I was going to mention that. So you mentioned that the raw pipeline. I was on a trip to Komodo years ago with Eric Cheng, who was one of the founders of Wetpixel, way back when. We had a Black Magic. I think it was Pocket Cinema. I think it was the first Pocket Cinema. And first of all, it only had a 15-minute runtime. The battery only lasted 15 minutes, which was it made you selective about what you were shooting. But then I can remember him pulling this Black Magic raw, um, data off the card, and then I think his pipeline involved running it through Lightroom. If he watches this, I'm sure he'll correct me. But I think he then ran it through Lightroom as basically a raw photo editor, synced the files in Lightroom, and then obviously exported it as a film format. It was terribly laborious. So what's the workflow pipeline look now with Red Raw? How does that work?
Sure. So Red has a software called Red Cine X, which is a processing software. You can open up all of your clips, you can adjust all of the raw parameters, and then you can export from that directly. So if one pipeline would be to take the raw files, bring them into Red Cine X, choose any kind of more compressed format that might be easier for your computer to manage for editing, and then you
Hmm.
could export everything, do sort of preliminary color grading if you want, and then just export everything as ProRes or whatever format works for you. Or, I mean, what I typically do is I edit with DaVinci Resolve, and I just bring the files right in. I don't transcode them. I just edit the files straight on my computer. I'm not editing TV shows, full big projects.
Yeah,
My system probably couldn't handle that in terms of the raw files if I tried to do a big project like that.
yeah.
But for smaller edits, the type of stuff that I'm working on, just field edits or throwing stuff together, most of the time I deliver my footage to someone else to edit. So but for me, that works great.
Okay.
So that's certainly a couple of different options. You can transcode the files to a more manageable format, or you can edit with the native files.
And presumably you could do it as a proxy as well. So you could edit in a proxy and then go back to the original resolution files and link it all up. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly, and you can even do that in camera if you have. I mean, one of the limitations of this setup, to be honest, is the media. So I mean, it records a ton of media, right?
Yeah. Sure.
So right now, the biggest card that I have is a 660 gigabyte card made from Red or Angelbird slash Red.
Mm.
And it's a great card. It works, but it's not a lot of record time. I meant to look this up ahead of time. I didn't have a chance, but it's not very many minutes of raw recording. So once those bigger cards, the bigger capacities come out, that'll be better. But for now, you're a little bit limited with card space. But you can shoot ProRes and RAW at the same time. So you could eliminate that step of having to go into the software and process the whole thing. You
Yeah.
could eliminate that if you shot in both formats simultaneously, although again, you'd be pretty limited in terms of your card space at that point.
But if you shoot like run and gun or whatever, you could basically shoot in ProRes and pull it straight off as ProRes, and then yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So
But I
so
have to say, I mean, for raw, I mean, for underwater, it really only makes sense to shoot it raw. It really only makes sense because you have so much more flexibility.
so within I'm learning how to use Resolve. I can't claim to be an expert. I tend to use Final Cut Pro, but the I've never really found a satisfactory way of white balancing or getting a reasonable white balance. So with Red Raw, for example, you can basically white balance that. So you sort out any color cast issues. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, you can do it directly from the image. So if you have a white slate or sand or something that you can pull a white balance off of, you can definitely do that with a selector
Yeah,
with Red Cine X or in DaVinci,
yeah,
or you can dial it in, with the sliders manually.
yeah. And then if you're bringing down video light, so let's assume you're using a video light to light stuff up, light shadows up. How does that,
Yep.
presumably then that your white balancing then in both underwater and in post gets more complicated? Am I right? There's no real advantage shooting in raw in terms of white balancing when you're bringing an artificial light source in.
Yes, I mean I use filters on all my lights, so I always try to match the color of the light to the ambient light.
Yeah. Okay.
And I even bring down multiple intensities, so I'll have green, or I mean up here in Maine, so up in green filters. So I'll have the stronger and then the weaker filters, and I'll swap them out during a dive. And so I really try to make sure that I spend the time to match the color of the light to the ambient.
So as a practical thing, I'm aware we're getting sidetracked here, but it's a good sidetrack. So as a practical thing, how do you do that? Do you do that just by eye, or do you do it on the back of the camera? How do you figure out which filter to use?
I do it by experience. So I just
Okay.
know, and just a rough idea of depth and just what it looks like. So I just know in certain visibility, it's more blue. I mean, I just look around and see, oh, it's more blue, it's more green. Up here, especially, it's so variable. I mean, it can be blue, it can be green, it can be,
Yep. Yep.
very poor visibility or what I think of as good visibility for up here. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a wide variety. So yeah, I'll bring down a bag of a bunch of different filters, and I'll just sit there on the bottom and swap them out if I need to.
That's very, and that's a fascinating, and just for emphasis for the audience listening, you're applying these filters to the lights, not to the camera itself, to the camera
Correct.
lens. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating. I mean, I think it's something that people often don't understand. I mean, even going back to kind of the original, they'll buy a GoPro or a relatively straightforward camera to use underwater, and the first thing they buy is video light. And I often think the results can be pretty funky, and I'm thinking like that doesn't look right. And I think you just explained why.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal, uh, especially for video. It's a big deal because if you just have your lights with no filters, then they're 5600K, right?
Yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah,
daylight
yeah,
color. So once you go down in any depth of water, either you set your camera to 5600 to match the lights, which works.
yeah,
Anything in the foreground looks correct, but then the background is just unbelievably blue, which sometimes can actually look kind of cool. I mean, sometimes
yeah,
that's a good look,
yeah,
but a lot of times it's not, especially if your camera ends up on any kind of auto setting, or you really have to use 5600K if you're using the lights with no filters.
yeah,
So, which, yeah, anyway, so that can cause problems. And then you have red, the image that's lit ends up looking all red because the camera's trying to balance the background.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
matching the ambient light to your lights is important.
Oh, that's great. Anyway, we got horribly sidetracked, but that's great. So you mentioned Raptor. So we've talked about the sensor. You mentioned noise. So obviously noise is a big issue in video. What sort of ISO tolerance does the Raptor have then? What do you shoot at? I mean, you mentioned you shoot in green water, so obviously possibly darker conditions. What sort of ISOs would you push to?
Yeah, so I've been using this I've been boosting it up to 2000, 2500
Right,
with no problem, and which is something that I would never do with the older Reds. So
right.
I think that it's hard to talk about noise or ISO without talking about the sensor size and the frame rates. I mean, really, what makes this camera great is, I mean, the color reproduction underwater is fantastic. So
Right. Okay.
reds have always been great with color.
Yep.
That is true here. The colors are great. So that the ability to be able to draw out those reds and those deeper colors that get lost so easily underwater, that's a big thing. But the having that 8K VistaVision sensor and having it be able to shoot in slow motion is great. Those things all individually are great, but if you have slow motion, then your exposure is darker, right? I mean, you have to
Yeah.
shoot
Yeah.
at a higher shutter speed, so your exposure goes down. So then you need to have good low light ability
Yep.
and be able to shoot at high ISO in order to utilize those other features. So it's almost difficult to talk about one without the others. I think that what makes this special is that you can boost up the ISO.
Yep.
I've taken some dark shots that I did that I've boosted up to 3000, higher ISOs that I would never think about using,
Yep.
and it worked. It worked, right? As long as you have some light, you can't make nothing something out of
Yeah.
nothing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
if there's some light there and some information, you can bring that up. So I've been very impressed by the ability to bump up the ISO and have that, because of the high resolution, the 8K resolution, that grain ends up being very fine, very nice. Especially if you're going to a 4K deliverable, ultimately,
Yep.
that ends up looking very clean, and that allows you to bump up the ISO so that you can utilize the higher frame rates. So
Yep. Yep.
all of that together really makes this a unique camera.
Yep. Okay. I mean, that's a. I mean, that's a. This is something that obviously the this is an engineering difference that makes a practical difference, and that's something that these are the kind of breakthroughs that make a big difference in terms of what we can and can't shoot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
because I mean, you can even crop into 4K on the camera and shoot at 240 frames per second. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And the idea, when you think about that, okay, slow motion looks cool. I'm going to go down and I'm going to film these sea lions at 240 frames per second spiraling around. It's going to look amazing. And that's true. And maybe that would work at the surface, right? I mean, if there's a lot of light, but you need a lot of light. Shoot 240 frames per second is
Yeah.
going to clamp down your exposure by a lot. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you need to have a lot of light. So either you have to blast it with light, with artificial lights, or shoot towards the surface, or bump up the ISO. And so
Yeah.
being able to do that is critical. Without having that low light ability, it would be pointless to have high frame rates. So
Yeah.
it's nice to have that combination.
Yeah. Well, that's a really, it's a crucial point, really, isn't it? Um, you mentioned cards, and I meant to when you mentioned it earlier. I meant to, so this is recording internally. What does it record to?
It records to CFast or CF Express cards.
All right.
Is that
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just off
Yeah. Yeah.
the shelf. You do need to use approved media, so there is some limitation. So I know like Angel Bird makes these cards that are red branded.
Right.
They also have their own cards, Angel Bird cards. You need to use the red branded ones, otherwise they won't work. I think just because of the high read write speeds. I think it's 800 megabits per second or something. It's very high.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. And is it single slot, two slot?
single slot.
Single slot. Okay. So presumably you could also take that out to a Atmos Ninja or something as well. That's possible. I take it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the camera has two SDI ports. So it does not have HDMI,
Right.
but it does have SDI, and these are 12G 4K SDIs. So if you had a recorder that could take a 4K
Yeah.
signal, this
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
output that.
Okay. And and
You also
and I,
can do, yeah.
go on.
You also can do interesting things. There's a USB port on the camera, and I've been experimenting with, you can use a network adapter, and you can actually transfer media and record directly using over the network, which is pretty interesting. So kind of a niche use, but for something like an ROV, having a
Yeah.
housing mounted on any kind of autonomous vehicle or on the outside of a submarine, any kind of
Yep.
external work like that, it's really interesting to be able to control the whole camera and get a live feed of the image and transfer media through the network. So
Okay.
that's
So the USB is giving you both. You can basically pull the data from it, but it's also giving you LAN control as well. That's very cool. Yeah. Okay.
correct. Yes, all through Ethernet. So you have to use an adapter, like this kind of an Ethernet to USB adapter, and then with
Yeah.
that adapter, you can transfer media, you can control everything on the camera. So that's pretty interesting.
And of course, if you've got a gigabyte Ethernet connection, you've got plenty of bandwidth. That's very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. And what lens mounting does it have on it?
RF mount. Yep.
Sorry,
So it has a
which
lock. So it has a locking RF mount, and then it has
RF?
you can use it's a RF. So it has a low flange distance. So pretty
Yep.
much any lens you can get. Like this has the right now. This is a Iskarama topside anamorphic lens, but it has the RF to EF mounts, just Canon adapter.
Right.
You have to buy separately, but with that adapter, you can put any lens on there that's EF.
Okay. And so what's your preferred focal length underwater then? What are you shooting at? What sort of focal lengths?
I like the 16 to 35. I basically shoot with the 16 to 35, the 8 to 15, and the 24 to 105.
Right. Okay.
I use the 100 macro, and then the adapters. I use those Nauticam, EMWL, all the different types of wide angle adapters. But primarily, yes, those are the lenses I typically would use. I did test out a number of lenses recently on this setup: the 15 to 35 RF lens,
Yep.
18 to 35, some different choices. But you become everyone has its own limitations, right? So 8K is amazing. It's a big sensor size, but it's almost too big for some lenses, even full
Yeah.
frame lenses. So you do get vignetting issues. So sometimes you have to crop into 7K in order to see the full image. So that does happen. But
The other problem, of course, and I know this is somewhat different with video, but obviously the high resolution, you start to really see optical flaws, and whereas we could get away with a slightly mismatched dome to lens combination, possibly with less resolution, now you can't because you can see it like there it is in your face, and it's a huge challenge. The lenses still work, and the dome ports still work, but the combination of the two is not always. It doesn't always work because people can see that it's not working.
absolutely. I was switching back and forth recently between the 16 to 35 with the 230 millimeter glass dome, and I was using also the 16 to 35 with the WACP2 wet lens.
Yeah.
And it is just night and day. I mean, I almost can't go back to shooting. I mean, previously I used the 16 to 35 with the glass dome all the
Yeah.
time, and it was a great setup.
Yeah.
But it's just once you use that WACP2 and you see the edge sharpness and just the quality, it's especially at 8K resolution, it's hard to go back.
And you can pull in what you would call iris as well. And the moment you start trying to shoot at bigger irises with even with big glass dome, you start losing corner sharpness so rapidly, and it's just amazing. WACP, a friend of mine is shooting with one in with the Sony A7S3 in the cenotes in Mexico. So shooting in darkness effectively. And, it's spooky what that camera and that combination can do. It's really amazing. Yeah, fantastic. And, that's as well. It's not only the camera, it's also the fact that you've now got the ability, you've got an optically corrected image being put into the sensor. And that's, yeah, it's just fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. So I know with this new camera you've been trying out. I think Nauticam have a new housing for it. How's the new Nauticam Raptor housing?
Yeah, it's great. Actually, I have it here. It's fantastic. It's a nice size. So this is it.
Oh wow!
Um, I've really been enjoying it a lot. So I would say the big takeaway is that it has this nice window on the side,
Oh
which
yeah, yeah, you can see it.
allows you to see and control all of the camera settings directly. So there's a screen on the side of the camera, so um,
Yeah, yeah, got it. Yeah, yeah, got it.
you can control everything right there, which is nice. On the other side, there's also electronic controls. So WACP, or sorry, I'm getting confused. RCP2 is the red control protocol. It's the way that they allow you to control the camera through Wi-Fi or through that Ethernet adapter, like I was describing. So this housing also has electronic control. So it's really great. So you can control everything through this panel, but you can also have a lot of control. There's top
Yeah.
electronics and also on the right hand or sorry left hand side. So being able to have that combination of sort of custom controls electronically and then also direct control is really nice. Um,
So
I
they.
find it to be a great size. I really like the housing. I think it's a nice trim size. The
Mm.
having the trim weights here is nice. I found it to be pretty easy to balance and with different setups, so that's a good thing. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
So correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the previous or the more recent Red cameras were DSMC2 was the control layout. Have I got that right? Um,
Not quite. So
okay.
DSMC2 was the last model,
Yeah.
the lineup of cameras. So this new lineup is DSMC3. So that's just the generation of cameras.
And
So the older cameras could be controlled with the same protocol. So they actually started this protocol RCP2 with with the Komodo camera. So they had
okay.
RCP1 for the older lineup. Then they came out with RCP2 for the Komodo,
Yeah.
and that extends to the Raptor. So the Raptor and Komodo, you can use this new protocol.
Right. Okay.
It's
Um,
similar. It's actually similar. You can control the older cameras with the newer protocol with some tweaks. So
but then in terms of control placement, has that actually physically changed control placement on the camera now? It's DSM.
completely,
Right.
completely
Okay.
different.
Okay. Hence new housing. So there's yeah. Okay. All right. Makes
Totally
sense.
different form factor. The size of the camera, everything is totally new.
And what batteries does the housing take, John? Because obviously that's pretty critical as well.
Yeah, it is. It uses micro V mounts. So it's the same sort of a standard V mount connector like you would see on a lot of cinema cameras, but it's a smaller size. So you can't actually use the standard V mounts because they're too wide.
Okay.
So the special micro V mount, but different companies make them. Core are the ones that I've been using. They have red branded batteries, and they also have their own core branded batteries.
And
And
those are available. Those fit into the housing, no problem. There's no issue with the back door of the housing.
yeah, no problem. So there's multiple backs. So I have this. This is a back for the port keys monitor for the BM5, I think is the name.
Yeah,
So that's it's a nice back, and then I also have just the standard back with no.
yeah,
I use this with a top monitor, and both are large enough, wide enough to accommodate the 150 watt hour batteries. And with the 150, I've been surprised. I mean, that's another problem, right? Is especially with Red in the past, kind of like the Blackmagic camera you were referencing. I mean, it's great to have a nice camera, but if it only lasts for 10 minutes, then it's not really
yes,
useful.
yeah,
So that was a problem in the past with Reds. Um, Especially, I'd used a number of older Red packages that were just older setups, and so they had older batteries, and it didn't last very long. That was often a problem with these setups, and now, at least initially, I found that that's not been the case. I've been using the 150 watt hour batteries, and I've been getting 90 plus minutes of camera on time. So, I mean, I guess if you were doing long rebreather dives, maybe you might run out of battery, but in general, for most uses, it's
yeah.
more than a dive worth of battery. So, I mean, you're swapping out batteries between dives, but that's fine. And in a lot of cases, you could even do two dives in one.
I'm guessing if your media's starting to get pretty full by that time, if you're shooting continuously 90 minutes, your cards must be pretty rammed anyway. So
I
both are
always
kind of
fill up my card before I fill up the battery, before I use the battery.
yeah, yeah. Okay, there
The
you go.
the 1.3 terabyte cards will be key. I don't yeah, you really can't. I don't think you should consider using this setup underwater with anything less than the 1.3 terabyte cards because
Okay.
it's just using so much media.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean that's an issue. So what outputs does the housing have then, John? What can we get out of it?
In terms of external monitoring,
Yeah.
so it has the standard sort of M16s. So like right now I have a SDI bulkhead. So you could do, and actually you could put an adapter in there. If you wanted to use an HDMI monitor, you could put an SDI to HDMI adapter that would fit in here. So you could do that. You could put an HDMI bulkhead, although, yeah. And then there's some M24s. There's another M16 in the back and some M24s. So you could hook up an Ethernet adapter or another SDI adapter to send image to the surface or to a focus puller, or it's really set up so that you could use it as a run and gun type setup for just single operator, or you could use it on a bigger film set with director on the surface watching on a separate monitor and someone pulling focus, and so that stuff is all possible.
Very cool. It sounds like a pretty complete package then. And so where were you actually shooting with it, John? Where were you actually working with it?
Yeah, so I've been working up here in Maine, so I've been doing some shooting in Maine waters, but also I just came back from the Cayman Islands, so I did some testing in the Cayman Islands, and so I just shot a bunch of stuff there, which was great.
As I say, it's sounds like been having a tough time, John. I don't know how you live with yourself.
I know. Well, I'm glad to see everyone else getting out there again. It's good to
Yeah,
see
it's good,
people.
isn't it? It is good. Yeah, that's been a wonderful review. Thank you, John, and fascinating for those of us that aren't familiar with video. So thank you very much. If people want to see more of your work, where can they see your show reels?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website, johnbettsfilms.com, JONBETZ films.com. And that's the same as my Instagram handle. So you could find me either on Instagram or on my website.
Brilliant. Well, we'll send people over there. I'll put a link into the comment section to the show notes as well. But thank you very much. That's been great. Um,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
Thank you. And thanks again to our sponsors, Exit 404. We say we can't do these things without them. Thank you to you all for watching. Please feel free to add comments, suggestions in the comment section, and drop us a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.